Hello, hello, and welcome to the channel Highly Sensitive Wisdom. My name is Anna, and today's topic is a topic that I know that 100% of highly sensitive people who identify as highly sensitive people can identify with and relate to. It is people telling us, you are too sensitive. And that is simply not true. So today's topic is, dear HSP, you are not too sensitive. So if you like this content, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and share your aha moments and key takeaways in the comment section below so that we can inspire and uplift each other. I really love it and enjoy it when you participate actively and don't just consume this content passively. It's not meant for, entertainment instead of Netflix and so forth. It is meant for transformation, and as such, your participation is required. So thank you in advance for your participation. Right. So I will be discussing. Yeah, that was a lapsus. Yeah, it is disgusting when people tell us that we are too sensitive. That is usually not true. But yeah, we will be discussing from a few different perspectives, especially the psychological aspect, also some of the energetic aspects of that kind of statement. You are too sensitive, and more in a more general sense also the power of language and the power of words. Words have far more power than we realize, and words can be used both for distraction or to build us up. Words can be used both to free us and liberate us from bondage, but words can also be used to limit us or to silence us when judgmental words come from other people, especially people who have power over us. And yeah, I have been recording previous videos that you can watch before this one if you want to, that are directed specifically to a highly sensitive audience, that I believe will be very helpful to you with both how you can reframe your own sensitivity and both understanding how this world works, so that we don't get caught up in narratives that may or may not be true depending on the context where you find yourself, and also that could make us doubt ourselves, because yeah, this world is a crazy place, really, and an insane place, and a sick place, and disgusting in so many ways. But yeah, we are here, so we have to learn to navigate this world and thrive and be happy the best way we can, despite being in a world as dysfunctional as this one. So remember, we are in the world, not of the world. Yeah, but with this introduction, I will start quoting a book. This is an international bestseller, has been for a long time. I have presented it a few times in this channel, Highly Sensitive Wisdom, already. So I will be quoting a longer passage today to show both sides of the coin of language, both the power to build up, transform, give us give us a sense of identity, but also that words can, have the opposite effect. And yeah, that will be the introduction, and then I will discuss freely from my own experience, both professionally and, as always, a few things about France. It has been the hardest but and most intense life school I've ever been through, but that has given a lot of depth to my understanding that I want to share with you, dear watcher. So the book is The Body Keeps the Score: Mind, Brain, and Body in the Transformation of Trauma by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. So Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, he is a psychiatrist. He has over 30 years of clinical experience of working with traumatized people. So by the time he wrote this book, yeah, more than 30 years of clinical experience, that he distills, all of the nuggets of wisdom and of insights, and yeah, it's distilled and concentrated, basically 30 years of his clinical experience as a psychiatrist, concentrated in this book. So read it, buy it, read it, let the information sink in at least a few months, because some things are very deep. and then you read it again. And you will keep discovering new aspects, new nuances that will help your understanding further. So just a trigger warning, some of the passages where he shares case studies from patients, some are quite graphic, some contain graphic illustrations, quite explicit on, for instance, sexual abuse and rape and stuff from his patients. So if you have been through anything similar in your own life, that could trigger you heavily. So just be mindful when you read this book. Read it when you are in a calm, safe place. Preferably when you have, loving, supportive people around you, if anything is triggered, so you don't have to go through that experience alone. But other than that trigger warning, this is a must read, and not only for traumatized people, and I will tell you why. So oftentimes, when things are going well, or more or less well, we don't give things a second thought, because, why fix things, why fix what is not broken, why dig deeper if my life is flowing well, and that's also why so many people stay on the surface level. They're in their comfort zone, where they don't bother to find out, digging deeper, because why bother? My life is fine as it is, But usually when things get really rough or dysfunctional, that's when we find both more depth, but also more details, and that's when we are able to connect the dots clearer. So that's why not only for traumatized people this book is a must read, but also for anyone who wants to understand a deeper layer of both the human psyche, your own functioning as a human being, and why sometimes connecting with other people or interpersonal relationships can be complicated. So this book explains not only the traumatic experience or the therapeutic things from his clinical perspective, but it also provides lots of valuable information, both how language shapes our sense of identity and our sense of self-worth, and the narrative we tell ourselves and others. That's what I will be quoting about today. And also how attachment is formed between parents and their children, and how those early attachments will create the psychological structure for future relationships. For instance, how our early attachments with our caregivers, often our parents, will play out in our romantic relationships as adults. For instance, that kind of information you can find in this book. So don't be scared, but just because it's about trauma, like, oh, I don't want to dig into that rabbit hole, that's uncomfortable. You will find a lot of valuable information here. But probably some of the things are, applying to you, even if you have not been through extreme trauma, such as rape. There are many different kinds of trauma. So all of us have been traumatized in one way or another. So read it anyway. That would be my recommendation. All right, so let's get started. So I will read from a chapter called Language, a Miracle and Tyranny. All right, so that is, which chapter is this? Okay, so it's part 5. It's called Paths to Recovery. So it's chapter 14, Language, a Miracle and Tyranny. So he shares two, case studies. One is of his own patient in the second part of the code. The first is a well-known person, a well-known author that he has not worked with personally, but he draws on that to extract some very valuable information as well around language and how that shapes us as children. And most of us have heard since childhood, you're too sensitive, you're too sensitive, you are too sensitive, you are too sensitive, you are too sensitive, making many highly sensitive people think that something is wrong with us because you're too sensitive. And we end up internalizing that, and that is simply not true. That comes from a very limited perspective from people around us, parents, siblings, teachers, classmates, friends, other relatives, all kinds of sources from other people. So if you repeatedly are told that you're too sensitive, we end up internalizing that and believing that to be true. And as soon as we believe that to be true, we'll be at war with ourselves, because we cannot stop being sensitive. That we are born sensitive. We are born highly sensitive, and that is our superpower and our greatest asset if we know how to harness our sensitivity. And I also spoke about that in a previous video, more in the spirituality and spiritual matters, but that applies across all boards in our lives. That video is called, let me see, why being highly sensitive is a great asset in spirituality. I'll drop the link to that video in the description below. So yeah, let me start quoting from the book The Body Keeps the Score by psychiatrist Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. So I quote, "The miracle of self-discovery. Discovering yourself, self with a capital S, in language is always an epiphany, even if finding the words to describe your inner reality can be an agonizing process. That is why I find Helen Keller's account of how she was born into language so inspiring. When Helen was 19 months old and just starting to talk, a viral infection robbed her of her sight and hearing. Now deaf, blind, and mute, this lively child turned into an untamed, isolated creature. After 5 desperate years, her family invited a partially blind teacher, Anne Sullivan, and now I have so strong chills now, a partially blind teacher, Anne Sullivan, to come from Boston to their home in rural Alabama as Helen's tutor. Anne began immediately to teach Helen the manual alphabet, spelling words into her hand letter by letter. But it took 10 weeks of trying to connect with this wild child before the breakthrough occurred. It came as Anne spelled the word water into one of Helen's hands while she held the other hand under the water pump. Helen later recalled that moment in The Story of My Life. Water! That word startled my soul, and it awoke, full of the spirit of the morning. Until that day, my mind had been like a darkened chamber, waiting for words to enter and light the lamp, which is thought. I learned a great many words that day. Learning the names of things enabled a child not only to create an inner representation of the invisible and inaudible physical reality around her, but also to find herself. 6 months later, she started to use the first person, I. Helen's story reminds me of the abused, recalcitrant, and communicative kids we see in our residential treatment programs. Before she acquired language, she was bewildered and self-centered. Looking back, she called that creature phantom. And indeed, our kids come across as phantoms until they can discover who they are and feel safe enough to communicate what is going on with them. In a later book, The World I Live In, Keller again described her birth into selfhood. Before my teacher came to me, I did not know that I am. I lived in a world that was a no world. I had neither will nor intellect. I can remember all this, not because I knew that it was so, but because I have tactual memory. It enables me to remember that I never contracted my forehead in the act of thinking. Helen's tactile memories based only on touch, could not be shared. But language opened up the possibility of joining a community. At age 8, when Helen went with Anne to the Perkins Institution for the Blind in Boston, where Sullivan herself had trained, she became able to communicate with other children for the first time. Oh, what happiness, she wrote, to talk freely with other children, to feel at home in the great world. Helen's discovery of language with the help of Anne Sullivan captures the essence of a therapeutical relationship, finding words where words were absent before, and as a result, being able to share your deepest pain and deepest feelings with another human being. This is one of the most profound experiences we can have, and such resonance in which hitherto unspoken words can be discovered, uttered, and received is fundamental to healing the isolation of trauma, especially if other people in our lives have ignored or silenced us. Communicating fully is the opposite of being traumatized. And then there is a new subtitle, Knowing Yourself or Telling Your Story, Our Dual Awareness System. Anyone who enters talk therapy, however, almost immediately confronts the limitations of language. This was true of my own psychoanalysis. Yeah, I'll skip a few lines here. That is not really relevant. Yeah. Since then, neuroscience research has shown that we possess two distinct forms of self-awareness. one that keeps track of the self across time and one that registers the self in the present moment. The first, our autobiographical self, creates connections among experiences and assembles them into a coherent story. This system is rooted in language. Our narratives change with the telling as our perspective changes and as we incorporate new input. The other system, moment to moment self awareness, is based primarily in physical sensations. But if we feel safe and are not rushed, we can find words to communicate that experience as well. These two ways of knowing are localized in different parts of the brain that are largely disconnected from one another. Only the system devoted to self-awareness, which is based in the medial prefrontal cortex, can change the emotional brain. In the groups I used to lead for veterans, I could sometimes see these two systems working side by side. The soldiers told horrible tales of death and destruction, but I noticed that their bodies often simultaneously radiated a sense of pride and belonging. Similarly, many patients tell me about the happy families they grew up in, while their bodies are slumped over and their voices sound anxious and uptight. One system creates a story for public consumption, and if we tell that story often enough, we are likely to start believing that it contains the whole truth. Remember this passage. I'll read it again. One system creates a story for public consumption, and if we tell that story often enough, we are likely to start believing that it contains the whole truth. But the other system registers a different truth, how we experience the situation deep inside. It is this second system that needs to be accessed, befriended, and reconciled. Just recently at my teaching hospital, a group of psychiatric residents and I interviewed a young woman with temporal lobe epilepsy who was being evaluated following a suicide attempt. The residents asked her standard questions about her symptoms, the medications she was taking, how old she was when when the diagnosis was made, what had made her try to kill herself. She responded in a flat, matter-of-fact voice. She had been 5 when she was diagnosed. She lost her job. She knew she'd been faking it. She felt worthless. And then I will skip a few lines. Yet the story our patient told did not explain why she had fallen apart after losing her job. So I asked her what it had been like for that 5-year-old girl to be told that something was wrong with her brain. That forced her to check in with herself, as she had no ready-made script for that question. In a subdued tone of voice, she told us that the worst part of her diagnosis was that afterward her father wanted nothing more to do with her. He just saw me as a defective child. Nobody had supported her, she said, so she basically had to manage by herself. I then asked her how she felt now about that little girl with newly diagnosed epilepsy who was left on her own. Instead of crying for her loneliness or being angry about the lack of support, she said fiercely, she was stupid, whiny, and dependent. She should have stepped up to the plate and sucked it up. That passion obviously came from the part of her that had valiantly tried to cope with her distress, and I acknowledged that it probably had helped her survive back then. I asked her to allow that frightened, abandoned girl to tell her what it had been like to be all alone, her illness compounded by family rejection. She started to sob and kept quiet for a long time until finally she said, no, she did not deserve that. She should have been supported. Somebody should have looked after her. Then she shifted again and proudly told me about her accomplishments, how much she'd achieved despite that lack of support. Public story and inner experience finally met. End of quote. Wow, this is powerful. So, dear watcher, if you're a highly sensitive person, doesn't really matter what kind of traumas you have been through, because I share this not from a trauma perspective, even the book is all about trauma, but to illustrate both the power of words and how one thing is what we have been told and integrated and internalized from what others have been telling us, and our inner subjective experience, the sensations that we have inside ourselves, and how we cannot simply ignore what we are feeling inside ourselves just to please everyone else or just to align with, the mainstream narrative that sensitivity is somehow a weakness, which is absolutely false. But if we align with the narrative of others, of society, weakness, sensitivity is a weakness, sensitivity is a flaw. We should, toughen up. We should have thicker skin. We should, be like everyone else. We should fit in. We should stop complaining. That kind of narratives. That will only ever create more inner tension, because then there will be a split between our inner experiences and what our bodies are telling us, and the narratives around us. And I can say from first-hand experience that no, we have to give priority to our own truth and stand in our power, in our own truth. We cannot try to please everyone else, because we will exhaust ourselves, we will burn out, we will be drained. We will not only develop a lot of resentment and bitterness for others treating us so poorly, we will also not be able to materialize fully our fullest potential. And when God put us on this planet as humans, there was already a purpose of our existence on this planet Earth. So there will also be nudges, from God, from your spirit guides, from the universe, trying to, nudge us gently into the right direction so that we can get into the lane of our soul purpose, and not be neither distracted with people who have nothing to do with our soul purpose, nor be constantly, dragged down by their limiting understanding, by their limiting perspectives, or stay always on a surface level just because that's what most people do. So with this quote, I hope that, and I felt I had so many chills while reading. It was so powerful. I hope that with this, quote, that you can see that what you are experiencing, no, that is not something, that you made up in your head. That's not something that you are, imagining. Like so many people who are less sensitive, they think we're just imagining tons of stuff, or we're making things up. Or even if we express with the wrong people, they will just see us like, oh, you're just complaining, you should be happy or unsettled, or like, even people could think we are manipulative when we express our own truth, what we experience, because their life experience is so far away from ours. Which is also why we also need a community with other highly sensitive people. As Helen Keller said here, when she was 8 years old, it was the first time she could communicate with other children who were, blind like herself. And that was just such a liberating experience for her, finally feeling at home, and often that is the sensation we have as highly sensitive people when we finally meet with other people who truly get us, and we don't have to over-explain ourselves or, feel bad for being sensitive. That is such a liberating experience. Like, oh, finally someone who gets me. So yeah, I should probably say something more about the author, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, because there's so many different kinds of trauma. So I should probably tell you a little bit more what kind of clinical experience he has with traumatized people across his very long and very successful career as a psychiatrist. So he started out working with war veterans. So he resides in the US. He started working with war veterans, so people who had been to war in Vietnam, and who came back, and at the time it was called, they had been shell-shocked, and now there's a better term, PTSD, that stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. You can also hear the variation of that, post-traumatic stress syndrome, but that was PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. So he started working with those, so grown-up men who were not traumatized in most cases prior to going to war, but who returned, very damaged from war, and who developed all kinds of symptoms of trauma that were very, very poorly understood at the time. And there were no established protocols for how to treat war veterans, coming back from the battlefield. So Dr. Bessel van der Kolk was among the pioneers to develop, effective, efficient treatments for that specific group of traumatized people. Then he went on to work with grown-up women who had been, sexually abused and assaulted as children. So, addition to their trauma and PTSD from the sexual abuse, it made matters so much worse, the fact that it happened when they were children, because then as children they were not fully developed as individuals yet. They didn't have the resources, the inner resilience, the inner sense of self yet, as grown-ups have, for the fact that it happened in childhood. And he saw very similar patterns. So even though if you look, and that's also why you cannot stay just surface level, because if you looked on the surface of those two groups of people, it would seem like, oh, one is grown-up men going to war, being physically in a battlefield, risking their life every single day at work, who had little or no trauma prior to going to war. Then adult women who had been traumatized since childhood, who had not been to war, who stayed, at home, or at least their home country in most cases, but who were in some cases abused, at home, by relatives, in some cases by strangers, but in their home environment, so to speak, because their home country or their home city, and they developed very similar patterns of symptoms of trauma. And at the time, for Dr. Bessel and the Kolk, that came as a surprise and a shock. Like, the demographics have strictly nothing to do with one another. And yet, when we look at it from a psychological and psychiatric perspective, in the clinical setting of treatment of patients, the patterns are very, very similar. And then he moved on to work with another group of traumatized patients that were children by the time he treated them. So they were not grown-ups, they were children in different ages who were on an ongoing basis being traumatized either by their caregivers, their parents, or by other relatives. All kinds of trauma. And then he developed with other colleagues, tools and for evaluation and treatment of developmental trauma, which means that the trauma happened during certain developmental stages in childhood or during teenage years, which will have a different impact in adulthood because it happened during critical times during our development. So then again, it makes it so much worse when it happens in childhood, because childhood and teenage years, those are the formative years, which means that they will set us up for the kind of life experiences we will have the rest of our lives if we don't do our inner work, to change both the narrative and our outlook on life. Otherwise, we will be stuck in dysfunctional patterns and turning around in circles based on our childhood conditioning. And that's why also, if you have been traumatized there, what you're in childhood, you have to make it a priority to heal from that, because healing happens in layers. It's not enough just to speak about it with words. It's not enough to do just one form of therapy, because usually there are different levels and layers. And usually only when something bad happens in your life, you realize, oh, I thought I had worked through that, and now here's another layer. If you feel called to, that was not the main point of this video, but if you feel called to do, therapeutic healing work, I'm here. I'm a psychologist and an energy worker, certified in the emotion good, body good, and belief good. And I will drop links in the description below if you want more information on those healing modalities. What I want to discuss also, so that was a little bit about the clinical experience of this author, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, that he has concentrated in this wonderful, wonderful, very enlightening book on trauma. The Body Keeps the Score, Mind, Brain, and Body in the Transformation of Trauma, published in 2014. So what I wanted to discuss also is that when people around us that are important to us, they repeatedly tell us a certain kind of narrative. And that narrative is not necessarily true. That narrative stems either from their limited understanding or because they align to a mainstream understanding and don't take into account your individual subjective reality. And it's so much easier to just hide behind, the mainstream narrative, because that means that the person you have in front of you, they don't have to take time and make efforts to dig deeper to understand what's truly going on. We just say what everyone else is saying, basically. So if the narrative is sensitivity equals weakness, then if they have a very sensitive person, a highly sensitive person in front of them, it's easier to just align with that narrative and say, oh, you're too sensitive. Rather than learning, reading books or watching documentaries about high sensitivity to learn how you work as a highly sensitive individual, it's easier to just dismiss and stay on a surface level, in this comfort zone. Staying on the surface level means staying in their comfort zone and making the bare minimum effort and just staying in their comfort zone. You're too sensitive. But for us, oftentimes that hits hard, for us, because that means sometimes we get defensive, or sometimes if we hear it from everyone, instead of realizing, like I discussed in the last video, treat others the way you want to be treated. Really? I mentioned that by the end of that video. If you want to watch that video, I'll drop the link to that in the description below. If we hear it from everyone around us, probably we are in the wrong environment with the wrong people, and we need to leave for our own safety, for our own sanity, and for the future that we will have. But if we hear from everyone, especially when growing up, we internalize that, and that becomes part of our identity. And then we will probably be, there are many, manifestations of this kind of programming. But what it usually will mean is that if there is a disconnect between how everyone else perceives you, treats you, and your inner reality, at some point you will start doubting yourself, or you will start doubting your own worth, or you will, be overanalyzing, overthinking things, not because you're particularly interested in that topic, but everyone else seems to agree that that is the truth. You are too sensitive. Everyone seems to have a consensus. You're too sensitive. You have a problem, and that will end up affecting us negatively, and shape our self-esteem, sense of self-worth, negatively, because that doesn't represent accurately who we are. And that is well known also from people, especially psychologists, who have done research specifically on highly sensitive people, that those highly sensitive people who received a lot of support growing up, where sensitivity was seen as something positive and something to be cherished, those have a much easier time in adulthood to be successful and create the life they actually want. But highly sensitive people who did not receive the support they needed growing up, or who were repeatedly told, oh, you're too sensitive, and others making them feel like a burden for being sensitive, they will struggle much more in adulthood, and they will, have to work much harder to reach their goals and create the life they want for themselves. So that is a really key to your future success in all areas of life. What kind of narrative there was around sensitivity when you were growing up, because those were your formative years, and the formative years are extremely important. Right. So next point that I wanted to discuss is from the energetic perspective. So this is narrative. It has to do with word, language, psychological, both your inner psychological structure, formed and shaped while growing up, but also formed and shaped by the environments and the people you are surrounded by in adulthood. But then again, there is the energetic perspective, and that's what I want to talk about right now. And that is, so in this case, when I say energetic, I mean, then I refer to the subconscious mind as subconscious programming. So the belief code works with, and I am certified in the emotion code, the body code, and the belief code. The belief code works with reprogramming of your subconsciously held beliefs. And those can be very tricky, because your conscious mind, the one that works on an everyday basis when you study or you work, you make plans, you carry out your everyday activities, you relate to other people, you make conscious choices, you use your willpower. All of those things happen in the conscious mind, which is only 1%. Everything else happens on a subconscious and unconscious level, which means that the subconscious and the unconscious minds, those they exert a huge, enormous power over us. So we often like to think of ourselves as humans as being rational and logical, and making good choices and so forth. But that is quite illusory. That is also a part of the illusion, because what truly governs us is what's inside our subconscious and unconscious. So if you have repeatedly had experiences with others who either had power over you in a structural hierarchy, such as parents having power over their children, or a boss, or a coworker higher up in the hierarchy in whatever organization or company you work for, they have power over you because of the hierarchy of that kind of environment. It could be, there are so many influences also if you feed your mind with regular news or regular conventional mass-produced entertainment, there will be similar kinds of narrative. Oh, you're too sensitive, or sensitive people are somehow flawed. We want people to toughen up and have a thicker skin, and don't take things so personally, and why do you make that about you? That kind of things, that kind of attitudes, right? So all of those kind of different influences end up shaping the subconsciously held beliefs we have in our own subconscious. And then once it's in the subconscious, that will run on autopilot, and that's how the subconscious works. What subconscious means is it's beneath the threshold for our conscious awareness. And obviously there are many positive programs and power programs also in our subconscious, not only these negative things. If we only ever had negative things in our subconscious, our life would be a tragedy from cradle to grave. It would be just a long events of traumatic, horrible experiences and hopelessness. Hopefully that has not been your experience, dear watcher. So there are indeed also positive, empowering subconsciously held programs that will help us create the reality we want with much less effort than if we have to use that 1% of our conscious mind. So when we have been told over and over, you're too sensitive, some of those things, some of those attitudes from other people, they will get stuck in our subconscious. And our subconscious doesn't have a language center. So it's not the actual words that get stuck. It's, the energy and the frequency of those words, the intention behind the words. That's what will get stuck in our subconscious mind, in that database. And then with the belief code, we use methods that translate, those frequencies into words. So it becomes, manageable for us to deal with. So, and then your subconscious mind will ask questions, and your subconscious mind will guide us to the closest statement that is not necessarily exactly what you have in your subconscious, but close enough for us to have some material to work with. So then it will enter your subconscious mind, and you will start believing that you are too sensitive. And as I said, you cannot be at war with yourself, or you will be struggling forever. You can never win a war against yourself. You have to be at peace with who you are, and preferably be proud of who you are as well. God created you as a masterpiece. You were not created to struggle and suffer your entire lifetime. If that is the case, something along the line has gone horribly wrong. That is absolutely not the purpose of being alive on planet Earth. There's to struggle and suffer our entire lifetime. Who would want to be alive if that were the purpose of being alive? So hopefully, dear watcher, that has not been your case. But we have to address that aspect, like you're too sensitive. No, you're not. That's just a narrative. One thing is a narrative that may or may not be true. One thing is reality. One thing is the truth. And you have to always stand in your truth, in your power, and be at peace with yourself, and find ways, learning with others or reading about it, or empowering yourself with information, because knowledge is power. Empower yourself with information and knowledge about high sensitivity, so that you get a deep understanding about how your nervous system is wired, how your brain functions as a highly sensitive individual, how your body inhabit your body fully, also to be able to recognize the different signals and alerts that your body is sending you. Because as I have said many times in this channel, Highly Sensitive Wisdom, the human body is a living lie detector. I learned that while going through the certification programs to become certified in the emotion code, body code, and belief code. And as highly sensitive people, and this is my own conclusion, as highly sensitive people, that lie detecting ability is enhanced, because sensitivity equals awareness. This is not an opinion. This is not a narrative. This is not some label. That is the truth. Sensitivity equals awareness. And if we live in a world, or we are among people who are not very aware, they consistently act out on their own unconsciousness and projecting their unconscious stuff onto you. Yeah, that will create a lot of disconnection and a lot of stress for us, because in addition to having this very heightened sense of awareness and picking up on so many things and informations and energies that others miss, in addition to that, we still have to feel in our own bodies some of the things that other people feel. Not all of it, unfortunately. Fortunately, otherwise we would drown, But some of the things we do feel, which will in turn just add to that workload of already having to defending ourselves. So, dealing with other people's incompetence and limited understanding, and on top of that, having to defend ourselves. And yeah, so my recommendation would be, one, get to know yourself very, very well, so that you know what comes from you and what comes from others. And all of the ancient spiritual traditions have always insisted on this also. Know thyself, know thyself, know thyself. And for good reason. You have to know yourself so you can stand up for yourself and know what comes from you and what comes from other people. And two, realize that most narratives that you hear are just narratives. They are not the truth. And you don't have to, agree with what people's opinions of you. It doesn't matter if everyone else around you agree that you are too sensitive because they have some kind of consensus among them. It doesn't matter. It's still not the truth. So many highly sensitive people have been scapegoated. That's a technical term in psychology to say that means that in all kinds of social settings, in group dynamics, social psychology, we attribute different roles to different people. And usually that happens unconsciously. But each person in a system such as a family system, they have a role to play. And most of those roles, they didn't choose themselves. They were attributed by the system a role. So many highly sensitive people have been attributed the role scapegoat, which is not flattering at all, which means that everyone else give them the blame for things that go wrong. Possibly because we as living lie detectors, our subconscious creates symptoms to alert us about the truth. And since nobody cares about the truth anyway, it's easier to silence the one presenting the symptoms by scapegoating them and giving them the blame, just simply because they, expose the symptoms openly when everyone else shuts them down and silence them. And that's also why, language can be so powerful, because it can give us the words to liberate us, as in the case that we read about Helen Keller, and how, as a child, that was not only what made it possible for her to communicate with others, but also have an inner sense of self and start saying, I am. Before that, everything was just darkness for her, because she was blind, deaf, and mute. Imagine living as blind, deaf, and mute. Nobody around you understands you. No one around you can communicate with you, and you're just a very young child. So you cannot communicate, because we are all born prematurely as human beings. So it takes 25 years until our brain is fully developed and functional, and our personality trait is consolidated. That takes 25 years. So imagine for a very young child who is blind, deaf, and mute. And it's such a powerful testimonial of, transcending limitations by not only learning to communicate with other people, but also writing books about her experience and sharing it with the world. Now I have chills again. So dear watcher, if you have had all kinds of narratives saying that you are too sensitive, you can use that as fuel also to transcend limitations, not only your own, but also the limitations that others have, and advocate for highly sensitive people, or advocate for consciousness in general, because sensitivity equals awareness, and we live in a world that tries to dumb us down by all means. A world that tries to dumb us down, silence us, silence all of the symptoms with pharmaceutical pills. No one really cares about the truth. Stay surface level. Don't show too much. Don't be too vulnerable. just go along with the narrative of the masses. Like, yeah, I didn't come to this planet only to play along with the narrative of an insane, um, sick, and very dysfunctional and destructive world. I wasn't born for that. I was born for more. And that's the key for you too, dear watcher. And that's why you have to empower yourself as a highly sensitive person, and don't buy into those lies that you are somehow too sensitive. That's bullshit. Don't believe it. Don't believe it. They are trying to just make you conform to their worldview and their limited understanding, and you're worth much more than that. You cannot be constantly at war with yourself to satisfy the demands or the expectations of others who don't even bother to maybe even read a book about high sensitivity to understand, your reality. Why give them so much importance if they're not even willing to read a book about high sensitivity to understand, your reality, right? So yeah, don't buy into those lies because they are just that, narratives and lies. So yeah, know thyself, study and power, inform yourself, empower yourself with knowledge, incorporate what you learn, the tools you learn, and so that you can still be highly, functional in this world and a high achiever, because that's how you're perceived as successful by others. And also, when you have been through trauma or something difficult, get professional help. Don't try to do everything on your own. Don't fall into that lie also, like, oh, it's shameful to go to therapy because, oh, then it means that something is wrong with you. No, it means that you are responsible enough to take charge of your life and of your destiny, and that you will not conform and settle to being treated like, trash. You're worth more than that. So going to therapy or doing healing work in whatever shape or form, that simply means that you value yourself enough to invest in yourself to have a better life and a better future. So be proud of being someone doing your healing work and not fall into that trap of believing the narrative that, oh, if you do healing or you go to therapy, something is wrong with you. Normal people don't go to therapy. Yeah, I wouldn't say that normal people don't go to therapy, but most people don't because they don't they live very disconnected on the surface, and they prefer to tell lies to each other and themselves rather than connecting the dots and healing inside, healing the disconnection inside. So yeah, a very good means of healing yourself is truly through the belief code, subconscious reprogramming. And then we can identify there are many places probably in your subconscious where you hold that kind of statement, I'm too sensitive, because other people, either because you internalized it from the outside or because others had that opinion very strongly about you. Because in the subconscious mind, we can also pick up on statements that are suggestions from outside sources. So outside sources, that could be everything from interpersonal relationships, could be media, could be films, could be even, music, because we also integrate things in our subconscious based on in which brainwave state we are. So yeah, I will probably talk more about that in another video because otherwise this video will be too long. But yeah, know that there is also something as, suggestions entering your system from different brainwave states, so that you are basically in a state of hypnosis, and then things can enter freely, because then they don't have to pass through your conscious mind, which is the gatekeeper. They can enter directly your subconscious and create a lot of damage through manipulating your brainwave states. But yeah, that's off topic for today, as I will leave that also as a cliffhanger for future videos. Stay watcher, stand in your power. You are not too sensitive. You're just the way you're supposed to be. You are sensitive because God created you sensitive. So be proud. You are a masterpiece. Yeah, I will keep recording more videos for you, dear watcher, specifically about high sensitivity. And I also want you to tell me in the comment section what kind of focus you would want me to have for future videos, because there's so much to be said about high sensitivity. I could probably record 100 videos only on that, or more. But yeah, I want to know also what you want to learn with me, dear watcher. So thank you in advance for your participation. All right, time to wrap up. I will start recording this video now, but I have a list of topics I want to record. So see you soon. Bye. Bye for now.